Let's start by talking about the purpose of pre-referral. First, pre-referral is important because it allows schools to test accommodations and modifications for students first. Because of this, this leads to less inappropriate or unnecessary special education referrals. A second purpose is to pinpoint areas of strengths and specific areas of improvement for students who are struggling in the classroom. Because of this, teams can figure out strategies to help struggling students in the classroom. There are 6 different stages of this process. The stages are identifying an area of concern, gathering information about the student, sharing and discussing that information with a team, discussing specific strategies that will help that student in the classroom, then implementing and monitoring those strategies that you've put into place, and finally evaluating those strategies and making a final decision. Each of these 6 stages will be covered throughout the next few slides of this presentation. The first stage in the pre-referral process is identifying an area of concern. This concern can be voiced by a variety of people. It is common for a classroom teacher to voice the concern, but it can also be a parent or a guardian or another school staff member that voices this concern. The concern can be formal, meaning it's a specific document completed by a teacher to outline the problem. It can also be informal. For example, a parent or guardian might reach out to a school staff member about their concern. There are many common warning signs for struggling students. They include things like failing grades, low comprehension, behavior problems, a lack of motivation, major life changes, and illnesses in their family. There can also be other warning signs of students who are struggling. The next stage is to begin gathering information about the student. It is very important to collect a variety of information in order to view the child as a whole. The information gathered should include things like instructional methods that are being used in the classroom, materials that are being used, the student's skill level, their background knowledge, expectations at home and expectations at school, and behavior management techniques that are being used at home and at school. It is also important to use a variety of sources to gather this information. The sources should include family members, other teachers throughout the school, student work samples, observations of the student, school records, as well as attendance and formal and informal assessments. I saw a really great example of this stage, gathering the information this school year. As an ESL teacher, I had a teacher come to me who was thinking about putting her student through the pre-referral process. She spent about 30 minutes interviewing me about what I see from the student, as well as looking through the student's files, interviewing the parents, observing the child. She took this process very seriously, and it really helped to view the student as a whole and to see all of the different elements that come into play as he goes throughout school. You may be wondering who looks at all of this information that has been gathered about the student. It's actually a whole team of people. Unlike an IEP meeting, there is no law requiring certain people to be at an RTI meeting, but it is important to include many different people who interact with the student in order to put together the whole picture about the student. The team of professionals included in the RTI meeting can be the general education teacher, the parent, other teachers who interact with the student throughout the day, the school's interventionist, maybe a school counselor or a school psychologist, as well as an administrator. Stage 3 is when the team meets together to share and discuss information about the student that they have gathered. Each member of the team will have a chance to share the information that they know about the student. It's important to start with the strengths of the student, as this sets a positive tone for the meeting. The team should remain focused on the facts and begin choosing specific and appropriate goals the student can begin to work toward. While discussing, the team may have additional factors to consider, such as poor classroom management or instructional strategies, or a student's cultural and linguistic differences. Stage 4 is the portion of the meeting where the team discusses the strategies that will best support the student. First, they must choose a strategy that matches the behavior. For example, if a student isn't getting homework done, an organization strategy may work the best. The team will also need to decide on a specific duration of the strategy. There's no set rule on this. It is really up to the discretion of the team and may be different from student to student. The team could also decide to implement some accommodations to help the student in the classroom. These accommodations could be changes to the classroom environment, changes to classroom management, or changes to instruction, such as pre-teaching concepts or small group instruction. It could also be an accommodation on tasks. An example of this would be chunking vocabulary on an assignment. The team has things to consider when they are discussing these strategies, however. They do have to consider who the student is and the student as a whole. They also need to consider the ability of the teacher to implement these strategies in the classroom, and they'll need to decide how each of these strategies will specifically be monitored for the student. Stage 5 is when the strategies are implemented and monitored. Typically, they are conducted by the classroom teacher, but they could be implemented by another staff member in the school if it's appropriate. The most important part of this stage is data. There has to be data to track if a student is improving, staying the same, or getting worse. This data is often tracked using a curriculum-based measurement or a behavior tracking sheet. Fidelity is also important in this stage. This means the strategy is given as intended by the intended person. This leads to the most accurate data. The sixth and final stage of this process is evaluating the strategies after they've been implemented and making a decision on how to proceed. This takes place in a new meeting with the same team who chose the strategies to begin with. This is where the data is very important because the team will look at the data to decide if the strategy was successful or if the strategy was not successful. If the team decides that the strategy was successful, they may discuss a discontinuation of the strategy for the student. If they look at the data and decide that the strategy has been unsuccessful, they may discuss a new strategy that would work better for the students, or they may decide that a formal special education referral is the best step for this student. It's important to note that there is no set timeline on this. It really is up to the discretion of the team to decide the timeline that is best for the student that they are meeting about. Now that I have explained the 6 stages of the pre-referral process, I wanted to conclude with some important tips for parents with a student going through this process. First, collaborate with the team. You know your child the best, and your ideas for your child are invaluable. Second, communicate throughout the process. If you have questions or concerns, always ask. Third, you have the right to request special education testing at any point during the pre-referral process if you feel like that is what is best for your child. The referral process is over. The parent, the team, or both work together to decide that there could be something more at play. The IEP process can then begin. First, the child will be evaluated for special education. This is typically completed by someone like a school psychologist. They will evaluate the student to determine the disability category that student would fit in. An IEP team will then be formed. This IEP team can look very similar to the pre-referral team, but now the law requires certain individuals to be in attendance at those meetings. Those individuals include the parent, the general education teacher, the special education teacher, a district representative, a school psychologist or another related school personnel, and also the child if and when appropriate for the child to be in attendance. In Illinois, the IEP meeting must take place within 60 school days of parent consent, and written consent of eligibility has to be sent home to parents within 10 school days of that initial IEP meeting. Once a student has been considered eligible for special education services, there are some very specific timelines to follow. In Illinois, an initial IEP is written within 30 calendar days of eligibility, and it cannot be written any later than 60 school days after consent of the parents. The notice of the IEP meeting must be sent home 10 calendar days prior to the meeting. And to add on to that, if a parent isn't able to come to that meeting, the school should do everything in their power to try to reschedule that meeting to make sure that the parent can be there. After the meeting, a copy of the IEP needs to be sent home immediately with the parent. The school then has 10 calendar days after that initial IEP is written to implement the IEP. After a student has been in special education services, they do get an annual review meeting once a year, and then the student is reevaluated every 3 years. And a parent is always entitled to call any extra meetings that they feel they need to discuss their child's progress.